The morning of my wedding day began like something out of a fairy tale. Golden September sunlight streamed through the windows of the bridal suite at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown San Francisco, casting everything in a warm, dreamy glow. My wedding dress hung on its padded hanger like a work of art, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves. The dress I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl playing bride in my mother's closet. At 31, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful career as a marketing director at a tech startup, a beautiful apartment in Pacific Heights, and most importantly, Nathan, my college sweetheart, my best friend, the man I'd been with for 9 years and engaged to for 2. Our love story was the kind people wrote romance novels about. Childhood friends who fell in love in college, survived long distance when he went to law school in New York while I stayed in California for my master's degree, and finally got back together when he moved back to San Francisco to join a prestigious law firm. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," my mother said, clasping the pearl necklace around my neck, the same necklace she'd worn on her wedding day 40 years ago. Her eyes were already glistening with tears, and it was only 10 in the morning. My maid of honor, Jessica, was bustling around the suite, coordinating with the photographer, the hairstylist, and the makeup artist with military precision. She'd been my roommate at UC Berkeley and had remained my closest friend through all the ups and downs of my 20s. If anyone deserved credit for this day happening, it was Jess. She'd been the one who'd encouraged me to give Nathan another chance when he came back from New York, despite my fears that too much time had passed. 30 minutes until photos, Jessica announced, checking her phone. "How are you feeling, bride?" "Perfect," I said, and I meant it. After all the planning, all the stress, all the late nights arguing about flower arrangements and seating charts, everything had come together beautifully. The weather was gorgeous, the venue was spectacular, and in 3 hours I would be Mrs. Nathan Phillips. The photographer, an energetic woman named Carol, began arranging us for the pre-ceremony shots. My bridesmaids, Jessica, my sister Amy, and Nathan's sister Rachel, looked stunning in their dusty blue dresses. My mother dabbed at her eyes while trying not to smudge her makeup. Everything felt surreal and perfect, like I was floating through a dream I'd had 1,000 times before. "Let's get some shots of you alone first," Carol suggested, leading me toward the large mirror that dominated one wall of the bridal suite. "The natural light here is incredible." I positioned myself in front of the mirror, adjusting my veil and smoothing the silk of my dress. Through the mirror's reflection, I could see the entire room behind me, the chaos of getting ready, the laughter of my bridesmaids, the pure joy on my mother's face. This was it. This was my moment. "You look absolutely stunning," Carol said, snapping away. "Nathan is going to lose his mind when he sees you." At the mention of Nathan's name, my heart did that little flutter it had been doing for 9 years. In all this time, through college and career changes and the stress of wedding planning, that feeling had never gone away. He still made me laugh until my stomach hurt. He still knew exactly what to say when I'd had a bad day at work. He still left little love notes on my bathroom mirror when he stayed over at my apartment. "I need to grab a different lens from my bag," Carol said, stepping away. "Keep posing, you're a natural." I smiled at myself in the mirror, practicing the expression I wanted to wear when I walked down the aisle. Confident, but not smug. Happy, but not giddy. The perfect bride expression for the perfect day. That's when I saw them, in the mirror's reflection. Through the open door of the adjoining room that connected to the groom's suite, I saw Nathan. He was supposed to be getting ready with his groomsmen on the other side of the hotel, but there he was, still in his white dress shirt and black pants, his bow tie hanging undone around his neck. And he wasn't alone. Pressed against him was a woman with long red hair wearing a green cocktail dress, one of the wedding guests. I recognized her immediately. Vanessa, Nathan's colleague from his law firm. She'd been at several work events we'd attended together, always friendly but professional. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women possess, tall, elegant, with the kind of confidence that came from being successful in a male-dominated field. But right now, in the reflection of my bridal suite mirror, She had her arms wrapped around my fiancé's neck, and they were kissing with the desperate intensity of people who knew they shouldn't be doing what they were doing, but couldn't stop themselves. The camera stopped clicking. The sounds of my bridesmaids' laughter faded into background noise. The golden morning light that had seemed so perfect moments before now felt harsh and exposing. I watched frozen as Nathan's hands tangled in Vanessa's hair, as she pressed herself closer to him, as they broke apart just long enough to look into each other's eyes before kissing again. There was nothing innocent about what I was witnessing. This wasn't a goodbye kiss or a moment of weakness. This was passion. This was intimacy. This was a betrayal so complete it made my legs weak. "Okay, I'm ready to," Carol's voice cut through my shock. She must have noticed my expression because she immediately looked concerned. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what I had just witnessed. My perfect day, my perfect love story, my perfect future, it was all crumbling in real time, reflected back at me in a hotel mirror like some cruel joke. "Babe, what's wrong?" Jessica appeared at my side, following my gaze toward the mirror. The adjoining door was closed now. Nathan and Vanessa had disappeared from view, but the image was burned into my memory with painful clarity. "I need to sit down," I managed to whisper. Jessica immediately guided me to the velvet chair by the window, while my mother and the other bridesmaids gathered around with worried expressions. Carol discreetly stepped back, sensing this was a private moment. "What happened?" my mother asked, kneeling beside my chair. "You went completely white." How could I possibly explain what I'd just seen? How could I tell these women who'd spent months helping me plan this day, who'd taken time off work and flown in from different states, who'd invested their hearts in my happiness, that it was all based on a lie? "I think I'm just nervous," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Pre-wedding jitters. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. What I'd felt looking at Nathan and Vanessa wasn't nervousness, it was recognition. The way they'd kissed, the familiarity of their embrace, the comfort they'd shown in each other's arms, this wasn't their first time. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a last-minute panic. This was a relationship. How long had it been going on? How many late nights at the office had actually been spent with her? How many times had I kissed him hello when he came home, tasting another woman on his lips without knowing it? "Maybe some water?" Amy suggested, looking worried. "And we should probably touch up your makeup." I nodded numbly, going through the motions of being a bride, getting ready for her wedding day. But inside I was free-falling. Every moment of the past few months was suddenly suspect. Nathan's increasing work demands, the way he'd seemed distracted during our final wedding planning sessions, the fact that he'd insisted on separate bachelor and bachelorette parties when we'd originally planned to do something together. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. "You know what?" Jessica said, clapping her hands together with forced enthusiasm. "Let's get you some fresh air. A little walk around the hotel might help calm your nerves." The last thing I wanted was to risk running into Nathan, but I also couldn't stay in this room surrounded by the evidence of a dream that was rapidly becoming a nightmare. The wedding dress that had felt like magic 20 minutes ago now felt like a costume. The flowers, the music, the carefully planned details, it all felt like props in a play I no longer wanted to be in. "Actually," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, "I think I need a few minutes alone to center myself before the ceremony." My mother looked concerned, but Jessica seemed to understand. "Of course, we'll give you some space, but we need to start lining up in about an hour, okay?" After they left, I stood alone in the bridal suite, staring at myself in the mirror that had just shattered my world. The woman looking back at me was still beautiful, still perfectly made up, still wearing the dress of her dreams. But her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who'd just learned that everything she'd believed about her life was a lie. My phone buzzed with a text message. Nathan's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt that familiar flutter of happiness before remembering what I'd just witnessed. "Can't wait to see you at the altar, beautiful. I love you more than words can say." The casual cruelty of those words, sent probably minutes after he'd been passionately kissing another woman, made my stomach lurch. I set the phone down with shaking hands and walked to the window, looking out at the San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz Island sat in the distance, and I found myself thinking about prisons, about being trapped, about the difference between what looked like freedom and what actually was. 200 guests were gathering downstairs in the hotel's ballroom. My father was probably adjusting his bow tie and practicing his father of the bride speech. The musicians were setting up, the florist was making final arrangements, the caterers were preparing the reception dinner. Thousands of dollars and months of planning, all for a celebration of a love that apparently only existed in my imagination. But what was the alternative? Call off the wedding? Humiliate myself and my family in front of everyone we knew? Admit that I'd been such a fool that I hadn't noticed my own fiancé was in love with someone else? I thought about the woman in the mirror, Vanessa. She would be here today as a wedding guest, watching Nathan marry me while knowing she'd had his heart and his body just hours before. The thought made me feel sick and furious and heartbroken all at once. Another text buzzed on my phone, this time from Jessica. "Everything okay in there? You've been quiet for a while." I stared at the message, at the concerned face of my best friend who was trying to make sure my wedding day was perfect, and realized I had a choice to make. I could pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, walk down that aisle, and marry a man who was in love with someone else. Or I could find the courage to acknowledge that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward ceremony time, each second bringing me closer to a decision that would define the rest of my life. Outside, San Francisco sparkled in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the small tragedy playing out in hotel room 1247. I was 31 years old, wearing my dream dress, surrounded by everyone I loved most in the world. And I was about to make the most difficult decision of my life. The mirror that had shown me the truth was still there, waiting. But I couldn't look at it anymore. Some reflections, once seen, can never be unseen. And some perfect days, once shattered, can never be put back together. I sat in that bridal suite for 25 minutes, watching the clock tick toward the moment when I was supposed to walk down the aisle and promise to love, honor, and cherish a man who was betraying me in real time. Each minute felt like an eternity, filled with the kind of silence that only exists in the eye of a hurricane. The knock on the door came exactly when I expected it to. "Sweetheart." My mother's voice was gentle but concerned. "It's time to line up. Are you ready?" Ready. What a loaded word. Was I ready to marry Nathan? Was I ready to confront what I'd seen? Was I ready to call off a wedding in front of 200 people? Was I ready to admit that the love story everyone had been celebrating for 9 years was built on a lie? "Come in," I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. My mother entered first, followed by Jessica, Amy, and Rachel. They were all radiant in their carefully chosen dresses, faces glowing with excitement and love. Looking at them, I felt the weight of what my decision would mean not just for me, but for everyone who had invested in this day, this moment, this belief in Nathan and me. "You look absolutely stunning," Rachel said, and her words carried extra weight because she was Nathan's sister. She'd known him longer than I had seen him through all his phases and moods and relationships. If anyone should have known about Vanessa, it should have been her. But the genuine joy in her eyes told me she was as clueless as I'd been an hour ago. "The photographer wants to get some shots of us walking toward the ceremony space," Jessica explained, checking her phone. "And then you'll have about 10 minutes with your dad before the processional starts." I nodded and stood up, my body moving automatically through the motions while my mind raced. As we walked through the hotel corridors, past other guests and hotel staff who smiled at our beautiful bridal party, I kept thinking about timing. If I was going to do something, it had to be now. Once I walked down that aisle, Once the ceremony began, it would be too late to turn back without causing a scene that would traumatize everyone present. The hotel's event coordinator, a polished woman named Patricia, intercepted us near the ballroom entrance. She was the picture of professional calm, clipboard in hand, earpiece in place, ready to orchestrate the perfect wedding. "Ladies, you look absolutely gorgeous," she said with a practiced smile. "We're running right on time. The guests are seated, the musicians are ready, and the groom's party is in position." At the mention of Nathan, my stomach clenched. Was he thinking about Vanessa right now as he stood at the altar? Was she sitting among our guests, watching him prepare to marry another woman? The thought made me feel sick all over again. "I need to speak with my father," I said suddenly. "Alone, before we start." Patricia's expression flickered with slight, concerned deviations from the timeline were not ideal, but she nodded professionally. "Of course. He's in the small conference room just down the hall. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then we really need to begin." My father was adjusting his cufflinks when I found him, looking handsome and proud in his black tuxedo. At 62, he still had the same gentle strength that had made me feel safe throughout my childhood. He'd walked me through heartbreaks and career decisions and every major milestone of my life. If anyone could help me figure out what to do, it was him. "There's my beautiful daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe this day is finally here. It feels like just yesterday I was teaching you to ride a bike, and now you're getting married." The love in his voice almost broke my resolve. He'd been so excited about this wedding, had bonded with Nathan over golf and football, had welcomed him into our family with open arms. Nathan called him Dad and meant it. They had the kind of relationship I'd always dreamed my future husband would have with my father. "Dad," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "What would you do if you found out something terrible right before an important moment? Something that changed everything?" His expression immediately shifted from celebration to concern. He'd been reading my moods for 31 years. He knew when something was seriously wrong. "What kind of something terrible?" he asked carefully. I thought about how to explain it. How do you tell your father that the man he's about to walk you down the aisle to marry is in love with someone else? How do you admit that you've been living a lie? "Hypothetically," I said, "what if you discovered that something you'd believed in completely, something you'd built your life around, wasn't what you thought it was, and you only found out at the exact moment when it was too late to change course without hurting a lot of people?" My father was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the careful attention he'd given to everything important in my life. He'd been a high school principal for 35 years before retiring. He knew how to read between the lines when someone was in crisis. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "is there something you need to tell me about Nathan?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that part of me had been hoping he would ask. That someone else would force the conversation I was too scared to start. "I saw him," I whispered, "this morning, with someone else, a woman from his work. They were kissing. And it wasn't just a moment of weakness, Dad. It was real. It was intimate. It was like they were already together." The words tumbled out in a rush, and saying them out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been when they were just images burned into my memory. My father's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and finally a kind of protective fury I hadn't seen since I was 16 and came home crying because a boy had broken my heart. "Are you sure?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already believed me. I saw them in the mirror. They didn't know I could see them. And Dad, the way they were together, this isn't new. This has been going on for a while. My father was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd told him. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but filled with a quiet rage. "What do you want to do?" The simple question carried so much weight. He wasn't trying to convince me either way, wasn't telling me what he thought I should do. He was just asking what I wanted, and trusting me to know my own heart. "I don't know," I admitted. "There are 200 people out there. The reception is paid for. Everyone has traveled here taken time off work, bought gifts. Mom has been planning this for months. And I love him, Dad. Even after what I saw, I still love him. But I can't marry someone who's in love with someone else. I can't stand at that altar and promise to be faithful to a man who's been unfaithful to me. And I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw. My father nodded slowly. Then you have your answer. But what about everyone else? What about the embarrassment, the money, Honey, he interrupted gently, a wedding is one day. A marriage is supposed to be forever. Don't sacrifice forever for one day, no matter how many people are watching. Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. Patricia's voice came through. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really need to begin the processional. The guests are getting restless. My father looked at me, waiting for my decision. In his eyes, I saw complete support for whatever I chose to do. He would walk me down that aisle if I asked him to, or he would help me walk away. The choice was mine. Tell her we need 5 more minutes, I said. After Patricia left, looking stressed about the delay, I turned to my father. If I don't go through with this, will you help me tell everyone? Will you help me handle the aftermath? Of course, he said without hesitation. Whatever you need. I took a deep breath, thinking about all the times in my life when I'd had to be brave. Starting college, moving across the country for graduate school, taking my first real job, all the small acts of courage that had brought me to this moment. This was just another one, except the stakes felt higher than they ever had before. I need to talk to Nathan first, I said, before I make any announcements. I need to look him in the eye and ask him about Vanessa. Are you sure? You could just walk away. You don't owe him an explanation. I owe myself the truth, I said. All of it. Not just what I saw in a mirror, but what he has to say about it. My father nodded. How do you want to do this? I thought about it for a moment. The groomsmen would be lined up near the altar by now. Nathan would be standing there in his black tuxedo, probably checking his watch, wondering what was causing the delay. He might even be worried about me, thinking I was having pre-wedding jitters. Can you ask Patricia to tell Nathan I need to speak with him privately before the ceremony? Tell her it's a bride's request, something traditional. Don't let on that anything is wrong. And what should I tell your mother and the bridesmaids? Nothing yet. Let me talk to Nathan first. Then we'll figure out what to tell everyone else. My father squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. This takes incredible courage. After he left, I stood alone in the conference room, staring at myself in another mirror, this one smaller and less revealing than the one that had changed everything. I looked like a bride. I felt like a woman about to jump off a cliff. 10 minutes later, Nathan appeared in the doorway. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile bright with anticipation. For a moment, seeing him like this, I almost convinced myself that what I'd witnessed had been a hallucination, a stress-induced fantasy brought on by wedding day nerves. But then he stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and expensive, the same scent I'd noticed on him during several recent evenings when he'd claimed to be working late. "Hey, beautiful," he said, reaching for my hands. "Patricia said you wanted to see me? You know it's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony, right?" His tone was light, joking, completely normal. Looking at him now, I couldn't reconcile this man, my Nathan, the one who knew how I liked my coffee and remembered every anniversary with the man I'd seen kissing Vanessa with desperate passion just hours earlier. "Nathan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Something in my tone must have alerted him, because his expression shifted from playful to cautious. "Okay, what's going on? Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or panic or relief at finally being caught. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine confusion. "What? Claire, what are you talking about?" Why would you ask me that? Because I saw you, I said quietly. This morning. With Vanessa. In the adjoining room. You were kissing her, Nathan. And it wasn't just a kiss, it was intimate. Like you've done it before. The confusion on his face transformed into something else, not guilt, but a kind of panicked recognition, like someone who just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. You saw that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. And there it was. Not a denial, not an explanation, not even an attempt to convince me I'd misunderstood what I'd witnessed. Just confirmation that it had happened, and shock that I'd seen it. So it's true, I said. It wasn't a question. Nathan ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, destroying his wedding day look. Claire, I can explain. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out how to spin what I'd seen into something acceptable. Finally, he seemed to give up on the idea of explanation and went straight to damage control. It was just a goodbye, he said desperately. She's leaving the firm, moving to New York next month. It was a moment of weakness, a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything. A goodbye kiss, I repeated slowly, from someone you work with. We had a brief thing last year, before we got engaged. It was over before it started, but she's been having trouble letting go. This morning, she came to tell me she was happy for us, and things got out of hand for just a moment. But it's over, Claire. It's been over. I studied his face as he spoke, looking for signs of honesty or deception. What I saw was a man telling me part of the truth enough to acknowledge what I'd witnessed, but not enough to reveal the full scope of his betrayal. How long? I asked. How long what? How long have you been sleeping with her? The directness of my question seemed to shock him. Claire, how long? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, I saw resignation there. 6 months, he whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of coming home to me after being with her, of planning our wedding while conducting an affair with a colleague. I felt something inside me break, cleanly, like a bone snapping under pressure. Are you in love with her? No, he said quickly. I love you. I've always loved you. Vanessa is she's different. She's exciting new. But she's not you, Claire. She's not my future. She's been your present for 6 months while I planned our wedding. I know how it looks, but it looks like you've been lying to me for half a year while I spent every evening addressing invitations and choosing flowers and planning a life with someone who was planning his evenings around another woman. Nathan stepped closer, reaching for my hands again. Let me make this right. I'll end it completely. I'll find another job if I have to. We can postpone the wedding, go to counseling, work through this. I love you, Claire. I want to marry you. Looking at him now, desperate and apologetic and still heartbreakingly handsome in his wedding tuxedo, I felt a profound sadness settle over me. Not just for the relationship we were losing, but for the man he'd revealed himself to be. The Nathan I'd fallen in love with wouldn't have been capable of this level of deception. The Nathan I'd been planning to marry was apparently someone who existed only in my imagination. I can't do this, I said quietly. Can't do what? I can't marry you. Not today, not after counseling, not ever. The words came out with a clarity that surprised me. I'd been agonizing over this decision for an hour, but saying it out loud made me realize I'd already decided the moment I saw them together. Everything since then had just been my mind catching up with my heart. Claire, please, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary mistake. 6 months isn't temporary, Nathan. 6 months is a choice you made every single day. Outside, I could hear the sounds of a wedding about to begin, guests settling into their seats, musicians tuning their instruments, the quiet bustle of an event that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was becoming the day I learned to trust myself over everyone else, including the man I'd planned to spend forever with. What are we going to tell everyone? Nathan asked, and I realized he was finally accepting that this was really happening. "We're going to tell them the truth," I said. "That sometimes loving someone means not marrying them." The next 30 minutes were the longest of my life. After Nathan left the conference room looking shattered and defeated in his expensive tuxedo, I sat alone for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. I'd called off my wedding. I'd ended a 9-year relationship. I'd just blown up my entire life in the space of a conversation. And somehow, I felt lighter than I had in months. My father appeared in the doorway, reading my expression with the skill that came from 3 decades of being my dad. "How did it go?" "It's over," I said simply. "The wedding, the relationship, all of it." He nodded, unsurprised. "What do you need from me?" "Help," I admitted. "I have no idea how to handle this gracefully." Together, we walked back toward the bridal suite, where my mother and bridesmaids were undoubtedly wondering what was causing the delay. I could hear Patricia's increasingly frantic voice through her earpiece as she tried to manage a timeline that was completely falling apart. "Ladies," my father said as we entered the suite, "we need to talk." The 4 women, my mother, Jessica, Amy, and Rachel, immediately sensed that something serious was happening. Their faces shifted from mild concern to alarm as they took in my expression. "The wedding is off," I said, deciding that direct honesty was the only way forward. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Jessica's mouth dropped open. Amy looked confused, as if she'd misheard me. But it was Rachel's reaction that broke my heart. Nathan's sister, who'd been so excited to officially become my sister-in-law, looked like I'd physically struck her. "What do you mean, off?" my mother asked in a whisper. "I mean Nathan and I are not getting married today. Or any day." "But why?" This from Jessica, who immediately went into problem-solving mode. "What happened? Whatever it is, we can fix it. We can postpone, we can—" "He's been having an affair," I said quietly, "for 6 months." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief. My mother actually stepped backward, as if trying to physically distance herself from what I'd said. Amy started crying immediately. Jessica looked like she wanted to hit something. But Rachel's reaction was the most telling. Instead of shock, I saw recognition flash across her face just for a moment, but long enough for me to catch it. "You knew," I said, looking directly at her. I didn't know," she stammered. "I suspected something might be, but I wasn't sure, and it wasn't my place to." "You suspected your brother was cheating on me, and you said nothing." "I saw them together a few times at work events," Rachel admitted, tears streaming down her face. "They seemed close, but I thought maybe I was imagining it. And then last month, when Nathan asked me not to mention seeing him at lunch with a redhead, I started to wonder. But Claire, I swear I didn't know for sure. I hoped I was wrong." The betrayal felt fresh all over again. Not just Nathan's deception, but the realization that others had suspected and chosen to protect him rather than me. How many people had known or suspected while I planned my wedding in blissful ignorance? "Who is she?" Amy asked through her tears. "Someone he works with." "Vanessa, the tall redhead?" This from my mother, who had attended several firm events with us. The one who always seemed to monopolize Nathan's attention. Even my mother had noticed. How had I been so blind? "This morning I saw them together," I continued, "kissing. And when I confronted Nathan, he admitted they've been involved for 6 months. My mother sank into a chair, looking pale. 200 people, she whispered. 200 people are sitting in that ballroom right now. I know, I said. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the embarrassment, for the wasted money, for all of it. But I can't marry someone who's been lying to me for half our engagement. Jessica, who'd been quiet during this exchange, suddenly sprang into action. Okay, she said, her voice taking on the efficient tone she used at work when managing crisis situations. We need a plan. Claire, are you absolutely certain about this? Because once we make an announcement, there's no taking it back. I'm certain. Then here's what we're going to do. Your father is going to speak to the officiant and the hotel staff. I'm going to handle the guests. We'll make a brief, dignified announcement that the wedding has been postponed due to personal circumstances, thank everyone for coming, and invite them to stay for what will become a very expensive lunch. What about Nathan? Amy asked. What about him? Jessica replied with a sharpness that reminded me why she was such a successful corporate lawyer. He can figure out his own damage control. My mother was crying now, but trying to hide it. Sweetheart, she said, reaching for my hands. Are you sure you want to do this now? Maybe you could postpone. Take some time to think. Mom, I interrupted gently. I watched the man I was supposed to marry kiss another woman with passion I haven't seen from him in years. There's nothing to think about. Patricia appeared in the doorway, looking frazzled. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really need to know what's happening. The guests are getting restless, and the musicians are asking about timing. The wedding is cancelled, Jessica said before I could respond. We'll need to make an announcement to the guests and convert the reception space for a luncheon instead. To Patricia's credit, she didn't miss a beat. Hotel event coordinators had probably seen everything, and a cancelled wedding was just another logistical challenge to solve. Of course, I'll coordinate with the catering staff and sound system. Do you have a statement prepared? We'll have one in 5 minutes, Jessica assured her. After Patricia left, we stood in a circle in the bridal suite, 5 women in formal dresses, surrounded by flowers and wedding preparations, trying to figure out how to gracefully end what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I should change, I said, looking down at my wedding dress. The beautiful gown that had felt like magic 2 hours ago now felt like a costume for a play I was no longer performing in. Not yet, Jessica said firmly. You need to be seen. You need to walk out there with your head held high, so everyone knows this was your choice, not something that happened to you. She was right. If I hid in the bridal suite while others made announcements, it would look like I was the victim, the abandoned bride. But I wasn't abandoned, I was the one doing the leaving. 20 minutes later, I stood at the entrance to the hotel ballroom, looking out at 200 people who had come to celebrate my marriage to Nathan. They were dressed in their finest clothes, holding programs with our names printed in elegant script, completely unaware that the fairy tale they'd come to witness was about to become a very public ending instead of a beginning. I could see Nathan at the altar, still in his tuxedo but looking increasingly uncomfortable as he realized what was about to happen. His groomsmen flanked him, confused by the delay but trying to maintain their positions. Vanessa sat in the 3rd row on his side, looking stunning in her green dress and completely unaware that her secret was about to become very public knowledge. My father took the microphone from the officiant, and the gentle murmur of conversation in the ballroom gradually quieted. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady and warm. Your presence means the world to our family. However, I need to share some difficult news. After careful consideration, Claire has decided not to proceed with today's ceremony. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I could see people turning to each other with confused expressions, hear the whispered, "What did he say? And did he say cancelled?" This was not an easy decision, my father continued, but Claire has chosen to trust her instincts about what's right for her future. We ask for your understanding and respect during this difficult time. I stepped forward then, and every eye in the room focused on me. In my wedding dress, standing where I should have been walking down the aisle to marry Nathan, I felt the weight of their attention and their questions. Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. I know this isn't the outcome any of us expected today, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is choose not to make a promise you can't keep. I could see Nathan's face from across the room, pale, stricken, but also relieved that I wasn't going into details about why the wedding was off. I could have told everyone about his affair, could have humiliated him the way he'd humiliated me, but that wasn't who I wanted to be, even in my anger. The hotel has graciously agreed to serve lunch in the reception space, I continued. Please stay, eat, drink, and celebrate the love that brought us all together, even if it's not the love we came here to honor. As I handed the microphone back to my father, the ballroom erupted in a mixture of applause, some supportive, some confused, some just relieved that someone was taking charge of an impossible situation. I saw Nathan's mother crying, his father looking grim, and several of our college friends staring in shock. But I also saw something else: respect. In the faces of the women, especially, I saw recognition of the courage it had taken to walk away from a wedding that everyone expected me to want. The next hour was a blur of conversations, explanations, and awkward social navigation. Some guests left immediately, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others stayed, either out of genuine support or morbid curiosity about what would happen next. Jessica managed the logistics with military precision, directing guests to the reception space, coordinating with the hotel staff, and fielding questions from family members who wanted more details than I was ready to share. My mother stayed close to me, playing the role of protective parent with grace despite her own shock and disappointment. "I'm proud of you," she whispered at one point. "It couldn't have been easy." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, "but also the most necessary." Nathan approached me near the end of the informal luncheon, looking haggard despite his expensive suit. Most of the guests had left by then, leaving only close family and a few friends who weren't sure what the proper etiquette was for a cancelled wedding. "Claire," he said quietly, "can we talk?" "Privately." I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 9 years, had planned to spend my life with, had just publicly rejected in front of everyone we knew, and felt mostly sadness. Not anger anymore, just a deep sadness for what we'd lost and what we'd never actually had. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied. "There's everything left to say. This doesn't have to be the end. We can work through this." "Nathan," I said gently, "you've been in love with another woman for 6 months while planning to marry me. That's not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That's who you are now, and I deserve better than that." "I made a terrible mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "Every day for 6 months you chose her. Today I'm choosing me." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him finally beginning to understand that this wasn't just dramatic, pre-wedding emotions. This was a real ending. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to untangle our lives," I said practically. "The apartment lease is in both our names. We have joint accounts, shared friends. It's going to be complicated. I don't want to lose you completely. You lost me the first time you kissed her," I said. "Everything since then has just been figuring out how to let go gracefully." As the afternoon wore on, the hotel ballroom gradually emptied. The flowers that had been arranged for a wedding celebration looked out of place now, too cheerful for what the day had become. The musicians packed up their instruments. The photographer finished documenting what would certainly be the most unusual wedding album of her career. By evening, it was just family left: my parents, Amy, Jessica, and surprisingly Rachel. Nathan's sister had stayed despite the awkwardness, and I realized she was struggling with her own guilt about not warning me. "I should have told you," she said as we sat in the hotel bar, still in our formal dresses, but with our shoes kicked off under the table. When I saw them together, when Nathan asked me to keep quiet about seeing them at lunch, I should have found a way to let you know. "Why didn't you?" I asked, not accusingly, just curious. "Because I hoped I was wrong," she admitted. "And because he's my brother, and you can't always see the people you love clearly. I wanted to believe he was better than what I was seeing." I understood that. I'd spent 6 months seeing signs of Nathan's affair and explaining them away because I wanted to believe in the man I'd fallen in love with, not the man he'd become. "Will you be okay?" Rachel asked. It was a question everyone had been asking me all day, and I'd been giving reassuring answers without really thinking about it. But sitting in that hotel bar, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been my wedding day, I actually considered the question seriously. Would I be okay? I was 31 years old, suddenly single after 9 years with the same person. I'd just called off a wedding in front of 200 people. I had to figure out where to live, how to disentangle my finances from Nathan's, how to rebuild a social life that had been structured around being part of couple. But I was also free. Free from the nagging feeling that something was wrong in my relationship. Free from the exhaustion of planning a future with someone who was already planning his present with someone else. Free from the compromise and accommodation that had gradually eroded my sense of self over the years. Yeah, I said and realized I meant it. I think I'm going to be more than okay. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, still processing everything that had happened. The wedding dress hung in the closet, and I made a mental note to donate it to a charity that provided dresses for brides who couldn't afford them. Someone else could have their fairy tale in that dress. Mine had led to a different kind of happy ending. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the evening, friends checking on me, coworkers who'd heard through mutual connections, even a few people I hadn't spoken to in years who'd somehow gotten the news. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, which surprised me. I had expected judgment, gossip, pity. Instead, most people seemed to admire the courage it had taken to walk away. One message stood out from my college roommate Lisa, who lived in Portland now and hadn't been able to make the wedding. Heard what happened? Proud of you for choosing yourself. The right person will never make you feel like a second choice. The right person will never make you feel like a second choice. I read the message several times, thinking about how true it was. For months, I'd been feeling like I was competing for Nathan's attention without understanding why. Now I knew, because I was competing with a woman who had the advantage of being new and exciting while I was familiar and taken for granted. But I didn't want to be anyone's second choice. I didn't want to be the woman someone settled for because she was safe and convenient. I wanted to be chosen deliberately, enthusiastically, without reservation. And if that meant being alone for a while, figuring out who I was outside of a relationship that had defined most of my adult life, then that's what I would do. The woman who'd put on that wedding dress this morning had been ready to promise forever to someone who was already breaking his promises to her. The woman taking it off tonight was ready to promise something much more important, to never again ignore her instincts in favor of other people's expectations. It had been the worst and best day of my life, all wrapped up in 8 hours of emotional whiplash. But as I fell asleep in my childhood bed, surrounded by the remnants of who I used to be, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next. Tonight, I was just grateful I'd found the courage to choose myself. 3 months later, I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment in the Mission District of San Francisco, a trendy neighborhood I'd always loved but never considered living in because Nathan preferred the more upscale areas. The space was smaller than what I'd shared with him, but it was entirely mine, from the exposed brick walls to the vintage clawfoot bathtub to the fire escape that served as an impromptu balcony garden. The transition hadn't been easy. Untangling a 9-year relationship was like performing surgery on your own life. Every shared memory, every joint decision, every intertwined plan had to be carefully separated and redistributed. The apartment we'd shared went to Nathan, since he could afford the rent alone, and I wanted a fresh start anyway. The joint bank accounts were divided, the shared possessions distributed, the mutual friends navigated with varying degrees of success. Some people chose sides. Others tried to maintain relationships with both of us, which led to awkward social situations and careful conversation topics. A few friends surprised me by reaching out more after the breakup than they had during the relationship, admitting they'd always felt like they were watching Nathan take me for granted. "I never liked the way he interrupted you," Jessica had said over coffee 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't. "Or how he always seemed to assume you'd adjust your plans to accommodate his. I kept waiting for you to call him on it, but you never did." It was painful to realize how visible my diminishment had been to others, how gradually I'd shrunk myself to fit into Nathan's vision of our life together. But it was also liberating to understand that the people who truly cared about me had been rooting for me to find my voice all along. The career change had been the most surprising development. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, my boss at the tech startup had offered me a promotion to senior marketing director, a role that would have required more travel and longer hours. The old me would have checked with Nathan first, worried about how it would affect our relationship and his career timeline. The new me accepted immediately. The job had given me purpose during those first difficult weeks when everything felt uncertain. Diving into campaign strategies and market analysis provided a welcome distraction from the constant mental loop of what-ifs and second-guessing that came with making such a dramatic life change. I'd also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Wong, who specialized in helping people rebuild their identities after major life transitions. It had been Jessica's suggestion, and initially I'd resisted, thinking therapy was for people with bigger problems than a canceled wedding. But Dr. Wong had helped me understand that ending an engagement wasn't just about losing a relationship, it was about grieving the future I'd planned, processing the betrayal, and most importantly, figuring out who I was when I wasn't trying to be the perfect girlfriend or fiancée. You've spent your 20s and early 30s learning to accommodate someone else's needs, she'd said during one of our sessions. Now you get to discover what you actually want, not what you think you should want. What I actually wanted, it turned out, was surprisingly different from what I'd thought I should want. I wanted to travel alone, to experience new places without having to consider someone else's preferences or schedule. I'd already booked a solo trip to Costa Rica for December, something that would have been impossible when I was half of a couple who had to coordinate vacation time. I wanted to take risks in my career, to apply for positions that excited me rather than ones that fit into our shared financial timeline. The promotion had been just the beginning. I was already eyeing opportunities at companies that would challenge me in ways I'd never allowed myself to consider. I wanted to redecorate my living space in colors and styles that reflected my taste, not our compromised taste. The new apartment was painted in deep jewel tones that Nathan would have called too bold: emerald green in the bedroom, sapphire blue in the living room, warm gold in the kitchen. Most surprisingly, I wanted to be alone. Not forever, but for now. The idea of dating felt exhausting, like learning a new language when I was still figuring out how to speak my native tongue again. For the first time in my adult life, I was enjoying my own company without feeling like I was waiting for something better to come along. On this particular Saturday in December, I was hanging art on the walls, photographs I had taken during a weekend trip to Big Sur, paintings I'd bought at local galleries, prints that spoke to me rather than matched a coordinated design scheme. The apartment was starting to feel like home in a way nowhere had since my college dorm room. My phone rang while I was adjusting a frame. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I answered while balancing on a stepladder. "How's the domestic goddess routine going?" she asked. I just hung a picture of a sunset that would have given Nathan anxiety about being too romantic, I said. "So, pretty well." "Good for you. Listen, I have news. Guess who got engaged last weekend?" My first thought was that it was someone from our college friend group engagements, and weddings were happening constantly in our social circle as everyone hit their early 30s. But something in Jessica's tone suggested it was more personal than that. "Who?" "Nathan and Vanessa." I felt a strange mix of emotions hit me all at once: surprise, hurt, vindication, and oddly relief. Surprise that they'd moved so quickly from secret affair to engagement. Hurt that he'd been able to commit to her so easily when our 9-year relationship had included 2 years of not quite ready yet before he'd finally proposed. Vindication that my instincts had been right. This hadn't been just a physical affair, but a real emotional relationship. And relief that any lingering doubts about my decision were now permanently resolved. "How do you know?" I asked, climbing down from the stepladder. "Rachel called me. She wanted you to hear it from a friend rather than see it on social media. Apparently, he proposed at some fancy restaurant in Napa Valley, and she said yes immediately." I sat down on my couch, a deep purple velvet sectional that Nathan would have called impractical, and processed this information. 6 months ago, Nathan had been planning to marry me. 3 months ago, he begged me to reconsider calling off our wedding. Now he was engaged to the woman he'd been cheating with. How are you feeling about it? Jessica asked gently. I considered the question honestly. 3 months ago, this news would have devastated me, would have felt like confirmation that I'd been easily replaceable. But sitting in my jewel-toned apartment, surrounded by evidence of the life I was building for myself, I felt something unexpected, happiness for them. Not because I thought they were perfect for each other, but because their quick engagement proved that I'd been right to walk away. Nathan wasn't a bad person, but he was someone who needed to be in a relationship to feel complete. The fact that he'd moved from our 9-year relationship to an affair to an engagement in the span of a year told me everything I needed to know about his ability to be alone with himself. I'm okay, I said, and realized I meant it. Actually, I'm glad he's happy. And I'm glad she's getting what she wanted. Really, I think they're probably better suited for each other than Nathan and I ever were. It was true. Vanessa was ambitious, glamorous, comfortable with risk qualities that had probably attracted Nathan in the first place and that I'd never possessed in the same way. I was more thoughtful, introverted, interested in building something steady rather than chasing excitement. Nathan had loved those qualities about me once, but somewhere along the way they'd started to feel limiting to him. You've grown so much in these past few months, Jessica observed. I'm really proud of how you've handled everything. After we hung up, I finished hanging my pictures and then made myself dinner Thai curry that was too spicy for Nathan's taste buds, eaten while reading a book about solo female travel that he would have found impractical. Small pleasures that represented larger freedoms. That evening, I found myself thinking about the woman who'd stood in that hotel mirror 6 months ago, watching her world collapse in real time. She'd been devastated, humiliated, terrified of making the wrong choice and ruining everything. She'd been someone who defined herself through her relationship, who measured her worth by her ability to keep a man happy. The woman I was becoming was different. She made decisions based on her own values rather than other people's expectations. She took up space confidently, decorated boldly, traveled independently. She'd learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, and that choosing yourself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Claire. This is Alex from your Costa Rica travel group. Looking forward to meeting you next week. Just wanted to coordinate airport transportation. Right, the group tour I'd booked for my first solo international trip. 12 strangers exploring Manuel Antonio National Park, zip-lining through cloud forests, and learning to surf on the Pacific coast. The old me would have been anxious about traveling with people I didn't know, worried about not fitting in or making a good impression. The new me was excited to see what kind of adventures were waiting. I texted back, Hi Alex, can't wait to meet everyone. I'm up for whatever transportation works best for the group. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror, the same mirror where I'd practiced my wedding day smile 6 months ago. The woman, looking back at me now, was different. Not just because she was wearing a bright blue nightshirt instead of a white wedding dress, but because she looked content, at peace with herself in a way she hadn't been in years. The canceled wedding had felt like an ending at the end of my relationship, my plans, my vision of the future. But it had actually been a beginning. The beginning of learning who I was when I wasn't trying to be perfect for someone else. The beginning of making choices based on what I wanted rather than what I thought I should want. The beginning of understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Nathan's engagement to Vanessa was just another confirmation that I'd made the right choice. They could have their whirlwind romance, their dramatic love story, their excitement-driven relationship. I was building something differente, a relationship with myself, based on honesty, self-respect, and the radical idea that I was enough all by myself. Tomorrow, I would finish unpacking the last few boxes, maybe take a yoga class, call my parents, work on the presentation I was giving to the executive team next week. Normal Saturday activities for a single woman building a life she actually wanted to live. But tonight I was just grateful. Grateful for the courage to walk away from the wrong thing, even when it looked like everything I was supposed to want. Grateful for friends who supported me through the hardest decision of my life. Grateful for the opportunity to start over at 31, to discover parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. The mirror in my wedding dress had shown me the truth about Nathan and Vanessa. But the mirror in my new bathroom showed me something even more important, the truth about myself. And that truth was beautiful, whole, and absolutely enough. 6 months ago, I'd been a bride-to-be, planning a wedding to the wrong person. Tonight, I was a woman planning a life with the right person myself. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.